Welcome back to another episode of Investigating Innovation with the I2C. I'm your host, Madison Travis, and on today's Spark Spotlight, we're sitting down with one of our newest mentors, Ryan. He's going to be talking to us about his experience and his profession and how he's going to bring that knowledge to the I2C. We're also going to be talking a little bit about how COVID has shifted business strategies. Let's roll. Hey, Ryan, how are you?
Doing great.
Great. We are so excited to have you in the Spark Studio as our newest mentor, a part of the I2C team. So we're really glad to have you in here and just get to learn more about your specialty and how you can help our startups here. So I guess introduce yourself, kind of what is your specialty, what does your background look like, and stuff like that.
Yeah, great. Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah,
and I'm looking forward to being a part of this community and being helpful as I can. So again, I'm Ryan Ramkhelawan. I'm currently Vice President of Venture Development for a company called Startco. That's based in Memphis. And part of my role is kind of a variety of things where I do innovation brokerage on behalf of, larger corporates looking to find new innovation to either leverage or acquire in. So a big part of my job is working with newer companies and newer technologies and startups that are looking for partnerships like that. And another part of it is running accelerator programs. Some provide seed capital, some don't. But it's really teaching the building blocks of entrepreneurship from a founder's perspective.
Right. Well, this is the right place for that. That's kind of the present day. What has your professional career looked like? What has kind of led you to be where you are now?
So originally my background started in healthcare. My specialty is in anatomy dissecting. So just like deep in kind of the inner workings of surgery. So I did organ transplants. So, so more on the physician PA side. Versus MD. And so all my training was basically in tissue dynamics and tact. And then from there, I took a break and got into hospital operations. And that's where I started learning the business side of healthcare, more efficiencies and workflows. Yeah. And through that, I was basically trying to solve a problem for the hospital system. Yeah. And there wasn't a device. And that's how I went into the entrepreneurial kind of world. So it was like building prototypes and figuring out like, hey, this solves this problem for this health system, but would it actually work across the country, and really understanding kind of scalability. And, of course, there's a lot of journeys along the way with FDA and raising funding and building teams. And I was fortunate to take that company all the way from, concept all the way to international launch. And then eventually the company was acquired, several years after. Yeah. And then since then, I've been building other technologies. A lot of it is in healthcare, but I've been working a lot with agriculture, smart city technology, and a few other industries.
Cool. It's always very interesting to hear about the mentor's background and kind of all the different areas that they know. Obviously, here in Huntsville, it's very defense-focused and very rocket everything and stuff like that. But the medical field is also one that I think is kind of growing more, especially with the time we're in. People are dedicated a lot more to research and, a lot more focused on the medical side of things. So have you been coaching people for long? Like, have you been a mentor long, or kind of what does that look like?
Yeah, actually, when I was starting that first venture, I got into an accelerator program in Memphis. I was like an inaugural cohort of that medical device accelerator called 0 to 510. And then, from there, as I was growing as a company, I was always as an alum/mentor. Yeah. So, since I would say 2011, I've been, growing my own companies, but then helping now, that I'm kind of like on the other side of, building companies. Right. That's my daily role, is really strategically helping founders think through strategy with their business. So some of it is scientific, where it's like, hey, we need to really make sure our things work. Yeah. But the other side is like in the business strategy. Like, if we're going to raise X finance, or we're going to approach this customer, here are the things that we need to do to make it a really viable venture.
Right. Yeah, no, for sure. And me and Axel had kind of talked about in the podcast we just recorded. We talked about how important planning is and how big of a role that plays. If you don't have any planning, if you're going to investors, I mean, it's great that you have this idea, but what are you going to do with it? Mm-hmm. And so strategy is sometimes a part that's missed out on, unfortunately. And I hate to see businesses that have such great ideas, but just don't have a plan or a strategy together fail because of that. I'm sure you've seen that a little bit in your career, but so, I mean, you have a ton of experience and stuff like that. What's some advice you would kind of give to the startup companies or just the fellow entrepreneurs out in the world that are listening?
Yeah, I mean, I think, for all the years I've been helping, I felt like it comes down to a few things. And, like at the end of the day, a startup is just, a collective of people around a
Right.
technology or an ideal. But a lot of times, you forget that, maybe we're co-founders, but we haven't really spent enough time together so we can really, learn to constructively debate, because then, eventually you get into the almost like the heat of the battle, getting your company off the ground. And sometimes you forget, like, hey, we're actually kind of distant now, and the
Right.
inner dynamics. A lot of companies fail just because we can't agree to
Yeah.
save our lives.
Yeah, it can be a downfall. I mean, and that goes for any business too. I mean, not any certain field or anything. If you can't get it together with just the people that are immediately working with you, there's no way you're going to be able to sell that to other people because you're not on the same page.
Right.
How would you say that strategy that you're talking about and that agreement? How has that changed in the world of COVID and during a global pandemic? Would you say strategy has changed a little bit, or kind of how have you as a mentor seen that change?
Yeah, I mean, I think it has, because obviously, all the normal stuff, we're all adapting to Zoom life, and not having that physical interaction. So that's changing dynamics a bit. So, I've seen some companies, over communicate at this time, and then some are like, we're only going to do one Zoom call. So I think there's an adaptation
Right.
there. And I think collaboratively working together has changed. Like, we can't just do a Google Doc anymore in real time. So it was
Right.
like really starting to get creative where, we're taking more steps to just do general happy hours and try to avoid talking about work so that we can
Yeah.
actually reconnect.
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know?
yeah. Those personal relationships are still important, and they're still a foundation, especially as a small business or an entrepreneur, with your clients as well. It's good just to have that contact, because I feel like now, especially just with how 2020 kind of changed things, is that your network is kind of limited, and you have the people around you because you're having to build those relationships instead of, you don't have as many opportunities to reach out anymore, and we're really having to make great intention to build the relationships that would have come very naturally pre-COVID times. So, well, I'm sure that you've given all sorts of advice, but what's kind of some advice that you've received over the span of your many years of experience? What's some advice that sticks out to you that has led you to be what you are today?
Yeah, I think one of the key things that I received, and it took me a time to really absorb it, was
Yeah.
it's like, don't build anything for yourself. It's like, then you're going to be your only customer.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so, just having that mentality just forces any, especially if you're like very tech savvy and you're physically doing the build. It's like, this is great. This widget is no doubt awesome based on my
Right.
research, and I really like that. But, with that mentality, it's like, no, I have to force myself to really ask my customers, do you want to use this? Or is it just
Yeah.
a really cool thing?
Right.
know?
And that's hard to do, especially because you are very invested in, especially if you're by yourself, like you get used to just that being, you being the only person you're kind of talking to about it. You're just sitting with yourself developing something. It's hard to step away and actually look at things from like
Yeah.
almost like an aerial perspective and sit back and be like, well, these components are missing for the customer that I would probably be looking, reaching out to. And especially too, not building something for yourself. So many people go into it thinking like, I'll finally be my own boss, or, I'll have all this money. And I just don't think that's the reality for
No.
many entrepreneurs, kind of going off the strategy thing. How would you say your mentoring has kind of changed in the midst of, a pandemic? I'm sure it's kind of similar. But, how have your kind of words and advice changed? Because I'm sure you're kind of having to go at it with a different perspective now.
Yeah, that's a great question. Before, it was very strategic and tactile, right? Like, let's figure out your finances and things like that.
Right.
Now, and I've done a little bit more, but I think percentages are different.
Yeah.
Where I would say now 80% of my time is meeting with, current founders and, just being like, hey, look, it's okay where you're at
Right.
now. Yes, sales aren't, amazing because
Yeah.
of what's going on, but people aren't really talking, but they feel like they still need to track. And don't get me wrong, like, yes, we still have to make traction and all of that, but there's a thin line between beating yourself up over a situation
sure.
that you could not control.
For sure.
And just being able to say, like, look, it's okay right now. Maybe we can shore up this area of your business, but you're doing what you need to do.
Yeah.
You can't control these outcomes.
And all of the world is in the same boat. We're literally all trying to navigate this at the same time. So it's not really like anyone has an upper hand in this. And I think that's important to realize too. I was talking to Dan Whiting. He's with Fighterlink. They are more, they're a newer company with us. And he was saying, obviously none of this was ideal. It delayed their move in and all this kind of stuff. But it's given them time to like refine some things in their company that they didn't really have time to look at before because they were busy with clients and busy doing XYZ projects. So now they have time to look at the details and just refine things that should have been fixed a long time ago. And I think that's a good thing. Even, we've really, loved getting to know you and stuff too through this podcast. But I wanted to also ask kind of specifically, what is your specialty that you're kind of bringing to the I2C? Like what are specific things are you going to be talking to our startups about?
Yeah. So, obviously I can cover a broad amount of topics,
Yeah.
but the things that I really like is really that more strategy with the founding team. It's like, hey, look, I know we're going to hit our financial models, but let's talk about the company culture and how do you want to position yourself as a company, into the eyes of the public or your customers, and really kind of thinking through that and how you might need to look at building your team.
Yeah.
And as say the founding CEO, what are the issues? Like I had to go through that. Like when you first become like a startup CEO, sounds cool, but then it's like, well, what exactly is a CEO?
True.
What do you do?
Yeah.
And there's not really great books that says here's your job because you're actually doing a lot of things.
Yes, and also there's so many resources that it almost becomes too much because everyone's telling you different things.
Yeah.
Like self-help books.
Right, and you can't model yourself after the CEO of Google. Like it's a very different thing.
Yes.
And so like I really cherish the opportunities when I get to help somebody. It's like, look, I've been through this and I've helped a lot of other companies.
Right.
Here's some areas that you should really look at, or like some more of that CEO coaching, internal help.
Right. Yeah. And that's something that, kind of like you mentioned earlier about the beating yourself up. Sometimes that like personal like evaluation gets missed over because there are just so many things to be done. I mean, there's a long to-do list whenever you're a CEO, whenever you're a small business owner, an entrepreneur, there's too many things to do to have like sit back and kind of look at what you're aiming to do in your position. So, well, we are super excited to have you, Ryan, and I cannot wait to see all the things you do as a mentor here at the I2C. So thanks for joining us today, and I can't wait to have you back on.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. Thank you very much.
And that is it for today's episode, you guys. We're super excited to have Ryan a part of the Mentor Live program and to see how his experience and knowledge helps the startups here in the I2C. Be on the lookout for who I'm going to interview next. In the meantime, make sure you're following us on all of our socials at UHI2C on Instagram and UH Invention to Innovation Center on Facebook. Onward and upward.